Hey, Spinks from QuietKat here. In this video, we're going to go over the basics of how to safely operate an e-bike. Now, electric bicycles today are very different than the bicycles that we had in the past. We'll call them acoustic bikes to make it easy. A lot of these new modern electric bikes have a lot of power, which is putting a lot more force through the drivetrain components, including the chain rings, the chain, and the rear derailleur. So in order to make these components last as long as possible, we want to make sure we're operating this properly. On QuietKat bikes, we've got both mid-drive and hub drive motors, and these basic principles apply to both mid-drive and hub drive. Although the mid-drive motor is significantly more important because, of course, the power is going from the chainring through the chain to rotate the rear wheel. This is where utilization of the gears is the greatest feature of a mid-drive, but it's also paramount that we use these gears in order to operate the bike at different speeds and operate in different types of terrain. So what's crucial about the mid-drive motor, of course, so the mid-drive motor is going to be pulling on the chain, right? Pulling this way in order to rotate the rear wheel. And what we want is the path of least resistance of all this energy to turn into rotation of the rear wheel. If the wheel is stuck into some dirt, some mud, maybe we're on a hill, there's some rocks or other things in the way, this power is going to pull, and the path of least resistance could be breaking the chain. Especially when we're down here in this ninth gear, the chain is actually at an angle to where it's coming off of the chain ring and immediately going out to the side in order to get all the way to this gear. This creates a shearing force which causes the chain to peel apart. So we're out here in the mountains. As you can see, we've got a big hill behind us. We've pulled off to the side, and the first thing I notice is a super crucial error. What's happened here is we've come to a stop and the chain is down here in the smallest gear. Now, when we look at the gears, you're going to have anywhere from 7 to 9 different gears here in the rear. Typically, the more gears you have, the more you have the easier or larger gears. Now, a common misconception, when we say downshift, you're not actually moving down the cassette. A downshift is actually moving the chain up. So gear number 1 is always up here at the top. It's the largest gear. Now, if we think about that acoustic bike from the past, if we were to try to climb a hill, we would want to shift into the easy gears, right? And the easy gears are up here at the top, 1, 2, and 3. And gears 1, 2, and 3 are built specifically for climbing up steep mountains, climbing up those steep hills, and making sure that you have the right amount of torque in order to drive the wheel. Now, just like on that acoustic bike, our mid-drive motor is actually benefiting from that easy gear, the same way you would when you're feeling like it's easier to pedal versus more difficult to pedal. In our truck, if we were to try to start out in 5th gear or 6th gear, we would more than likely stall, which is why we always have to start in 1st or 2nd and then work our way up. It's the same thing on an e-bike, especially with a mid-drive motor. We want to make sure we're starting up in one of the easier gears. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be in gear number 1 all the time. Just like in some vehicles, you don't have to be in 1st gear, you can start in 2nd. It's all based on what the gear ratio looks like in relation to the terrain that you're on. So if we're on a nice flat surface, I recommend starting out in gear 3 or 4. This is going to be enough torque to be able to safely get the wheel moving, but also is going to have enough power to get you up and going so that you're not fighting against balancing on the bike. If we're starting to go up a hill, ideally we want to turn around, start down on a flat section, and then work our way to the hill. It's very awkward to try to start while on the bike, while on a hill, and fighting against gravity and all the resistance. Okay, so what do we do in this situation? We're down in the hardest gear. We're about to go up a steep hill. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure the bike is powered off so that when we go to crank the pedals, we don't injure ourselves or someone else around us. So the bike is powered off. It's onto the kickstand. You're going to lean the bike up so that the rear wheel can rotate freely. And then you're simply going to use the thumb shifter, rotate the pedals, and we'll go ahead and shift all the way up. We're now in gear number 4. I'm going to go up 1 more gear. That way I'm starting in gear number 3. All right, so now we're going to power the bike back on. It comes back up into power level 1. I like to double check by leaning the bike back up again, just pushing the throttle a little bit, and just making sure that that gear shift has been completed. It's always important to make sure that the system is rotating and without resistance when you're making a gear shift. So now that we're into the proper gear, we can go ahead and climb up this hill. So now we're going to head back down the hill, and what's important is to maintain proper braking technique. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that we're seated firmly on the saddle. Our back is nice and straight, eyes up, looking ahead at the terrain. Fingers are on the brake levers. QuietKat comes with disc brakes and a 2-finger lever to give you a little extra power. On my Apex here, I've got hydraulic disc brakes, which have the ultimate stopping power and allow me to slightly modulate how much braking pressure I need. It's important that we don't just grab the brakes and hold them down the entire time. We want to maintain rolling traction, which means keeping the wheels rolling as we go over rugged terrain. What we don't want to do is squeeze both brakes all the way to the handlebars, locking up the wheels. It's important to maintain that rolling traction, especially when the terrain gets really rough or loose. That way the wheels are consistently rolling, but we're also able to add just a little bit of braking pressure. It's important to use both brakes. A lot of people think if I squeeze the front brake, I'm going to flip over the handlebars. And that's just not the case. The QuietKat bikes are very heavy and designed specifically not to do that. So we want to use both brakes. Now, it is important when you're going around a turn, that's when you want to release the front brake. We want to avoid locking up the differential speed between the front and rear wheels. So what's important is when we go around a turn, that's when we want to get off of the front brake. That way the front wheel can roll and the rear wheel can follow behind. Obviously there's a differential speed between the front and rear wheels, and we want to avoid locking up the front so that we don't pretzel over. Most electric bicycles today, including most QuietKat models, come with adjustable power levels. And you have anywhere from 1 to 10 different power levels of assist, and this is going to determine how much power you're going to get out of the system. General rule of thumb is you want to use as minimal assist as needed to overcome the terrain that you're on. This is going to help save your battery range, and it's also going to help you stay in control of the machine. What we don't want to do is go into some rocky riverbed at full speed and have to manage just staying on the bike. Instead, what we want to do is control the machine through the terrain safely. It's also important if you're out on the bike path or on the side of the road to make sure that you understand where the traffic is and understand at what speeds can you safely travel. If you're on a sidewalk with pedestrians, you don't want to be in power level 5 where the bike is going to jerk forward every time you hit the throttle or move the pedals. Instead, you want to use the power level that's appropriate to the terrain that you're on. So on my Apex here, I prefer power level 3 in eco mode. It has enough power for me to move with the machine and all of my gear and over most terrain. When I see a steep hill like this, I'll go up into level 4, and for the steepest hills, I'll switch over to sport mode, give her all she's got. One thing to remember is that you can have all the power in the world, but you need to have grip. So it's important to make sure that you're maintaining grip on the rear wheel. So we don't want to have too much power, again, just enough power to overcome the terrain that we're riding. So those are just some of the basics on riding, shifting, and braking on an electric mountain bike. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you out on the trail.